So chlorophyll, luteolin, and camphorol have been studied scientifically as isolated molecules as well as synergistically in twos and threes. And they inactivate those heterocyclic amine mutagens.
So, I mean, what I can derive practically from this is that when we're sort of using butane or propane or hexane or whatever to strip out cannabinoids and a small band of the available terpenes and terpenoids,
Mhm.
we're losing this stuff that's making that make sure we don't get cancer from lighting it on fire,
You're
right?
definitely losing some of it. Yeah, yeah, exactly. And everyone, people are very fascinated. Some of the cannabinoids have pretty strong anti-carcinogenic properties also, but chlorophyll's a great thing. Chlorophyll is sort of the molecule that allows us to exist on the earth, doesn't it? I mean, that's what's capturing photons from the sun and sort of powering the whole of nature and creating all the food that we eat, as well as the plants that we have different relationships with. So, the whole chlorophyll thing, that's cultural again. That's not nature. Nature isn't interested in getting rid of the chlorophyll. Nature, reveres the chlorophyll.
So, to
So,
what extent does this come into play? And I've recently started getting into traditional Chinese medicine and taking all these tonics. And
mhm.
now I know a lot of times they'll use just a water and ethanol extraction. So I would assume the same principle would apply, right? Like you're leaving behind some good if you're kind of leaving that mash in there.
Yeah, well, every time you do an extraction to some degree or another, you're selecting for certain constituents. And, the way that works is your different extraction fluids, you have water, you have alcohol, you have butane or, organic fluids or CO2 or, whatever fluid that you're using, it has a selectivity for particular constituents. Mostly that's a matching of polarity that goes on in there. And so that they will pull out and concentrate certain constituents and to certain degrees, right? So, if you want the full spectrum of, say, what's in a cannabis leaf, then you eat the cannabis leaf, right? So that's why some people, are very interested if they're working with, if they need to really emphasize the anti-inflammatory capacity of the plant, they'll juice the fresh fan leaves and do that on a longer term basis, and that really harvests a lot of the anti-inflammatory chemicals by doing that. Or they'll pulverize them in a Vitamix or something like that, so you're not even actually doing an extraction at that point. You're more like just breaking the cell walls and making the contents bioavailable. So there's that. But yes, like you can also mix your extractions back together. Maybe you'll need to do some emulsification or something like that. What I used to do before becoming the director of the school is, and this was in the early days of, let's say, ambiguous regulations
Sure, sure.
in Colorado. But one of the things that I did was I revived the way that the 19th century pharmacists used to extract cannabis with percolations. And they use various degrees of ethanol and various degrees of water. And so I went back to the old literature and, read what the pharmacists were doing back in the in the mid to late 1800s when that came on the scene. And, what they were doing back then was their extraction method would get, a very good yield, actually. It was really slow, but it was a high yield of cannabinoids, along with the chlorophyll, along with the carotenoids that were in the plant. Carotenoids are a class of terpenoids, actually. They're the largest, heaviest terpenoids. And those are what make carrots yellow
Yeah, they're
and
yellow,
orange,
right?
hence the name, the carotenoids, and they're in all green leaves. All your dark leafy greens are a good source of carotenoids. So we would get the carotenoids out, the chlorophyll out, the cannabinoids out with this ethanol extraction process. Plus, you're getting all the other terpenoids, so the monoterpenes, the sesquiterpenes, the diterpene phytol that's in there, and the oil soluble polyphenols, which are some of the really powerful antioxidant, anti inflammatory, and anti carcinogenic constituents. So, it's a very broad spectrum extract in that sense. And we would do that and then have a tincture, basically, old USP style, straight out of the US pharmacopoeia from those days. And then I would do a kind of Eastern technique, which was to extract the leaves in honey. actually use honey as an extraction
So
fluid.
how does honey work as a solvent? Is that like enzymatic,
Yeah,
or is this a...
kind of. It's pretty miraculous. No, so honey is mostly sugar. Sugar is very polar. It likes water. You dissolve honey very easily in your hot water. So it's kind of like a water extraction, but because of the viscosity, the thickness of the honey, and also because about 5% of honey is a variety of other constituents, including polyphenols and waxes. So it's kind of a complex extraction fluid that tends to do things that you wouldn't expect it could do based on the fact that it's made of sugar and water. So it's a little broader spectrum than water. So it does get, definitely gets a lot of the terpenoid constituents into the honey also, which is really interesting. And one thing that I do is I make all different kind of honey extracts. Like we just extracted a whole bunch of elderberries, just so amazing. So we can make elderberry syrup for the cold and flu season.
Oh man, our buddy Jim
Ginger.
loves to talk about elderberry
Oh
in
yeah.
as a his whole thing is whenever I mention any herb I'm really into, he tells me about how it works with the endocannabinoid system. So
Yes.
elderberry in conjunction with cannabinoids, working sort of through the mechanism of the endocannabinoid system. Can you talk about other plants that
Excellent.
sort of fit in that class?
Yeah, absolutely. So, one of the most famous ones, since we were talking about cold and flu season, right along next to elderberry is echinacea, right? So, a lot of people hear echinacea and they think immune system stimulant, right? Which is part of what the plant can do, but it also has some very strong anti-inflammatory and immunomodulating properties. And some of those properties are based in a set of constituents called alkamides. And if you've ever taken echinacea tincture, just straight up, it's this very strange, odd, tingly, buzzy sensation that you get on your tongue from doing that. And that's you're actually tasting those alkamides. So there's a few plants that contain alkamides. There's echinacea, there's prickly ash, which was very popular with the old botanical physicians in North America. There's this plant, sometimes they call it Szechuan buttons. It's also known as toothache plants, Balanthes, and there's a couple others that aren't popping up to my mind right now. But and actually black pepper has some alkamides in it too that are somewhat related, which is really interesting for multiple reasons that we can get back to. But anyway, so the echinacea being the poster plant of the alkamides, alkamides are considered to be basically cannabinoid molecules, although the structure is really different from our classical cannabinoids, but they interact with cannabinoid receptors.
And that's what I think is something I was talking. Generally, just sat down with us on something we were talking about the other day. That this is kind of like for a lot of us who maybe wouldn't have gotten into plants or herbal medicine. Certainly, just
Hmm.
being really into cannabis has sort of steered us into being hip to a few of these things. So
Right.
it's really cool to broaden the perspective and have you on the line. So it looks like
Definitely.
we got to let you take a pause for a break in about 7 minutes here. So
Uh-huh.
let's bang out maybe another topic that's I'm curious to get by you is there something we're missing? Is there a better way to extract this plant when we're trying to, like you kind of alluded to, fractionating it and then mixing it all back together, right? Like, what's the best way to do that? What's the best way to
Yeah.
remix it?
Right, right. Well, it really depends on what you want to do, and what you want to do with the plant. And also the best way to do something kind of depends on a lot of convenience factors as well, right? And economic factors. Sometimes the best way is going to take 3 days and nobody's going to do it because they don't have time. Therefore, we'll go with the next best. So, that's a pretty broad question, but something that I find really interesting. I've been watching videos lately from Rafi Mashulam. You know who he
Yeah, for
is.
sure.
Yeah. And something that he said in one of the videos really, really caught my attention. I've been thinking about it a lot for the last couple of days. And he said, when they were first discovering, isolating, and characterizing the cannabinoids back in the 60s, and they started to do the earliest assays to see what the different molecules could do, the acid forms like, THCA, CBDA, which are naturally occurring in the plant until it's exposed to, decarboxylation or heating or aging or whatever. Mainly the cannabinoids are in those form. And, early on, they discovered that the acid forms of the cannabinoids, although having less psychotropic activity, have more anti-inflammatory analgesic activity, in the acid forms than they do once they're decarboxylated. But nobody ever took that, he said, and ran with that. And, it's a kind of the siren call of the interesting cannabinoids once they're decarboxylated stole the show at that point, and there just never was a lot of, research funds directed to that because it's not patentable, so, it's not worth it.
Oh, it is
Um,
now.
yeah, so a lot of people are catching on to that lately, which is really exciting. But, I think it depends on what you want to do. If you want to go after that maximum anti-inflammatory, you're dealing with fibromyalgia, or, you're dealing with some kind of inflammatory disease, of which pretty much all chronic diseases do have an inflammatory component, then, why not do your techniques to preserve those? And those are more water soluble forms. Not that they're, hugely water soluble, but, I think the hydroethanolic extractions, or the using ethanol or some combination of ethanol and water, you're going to favor those if you have, freshly dried plant material. And the other thing I was thinking about was, why don't we start with undried plant material, right?
So like
Um,
fresh plant material, which
yeah,
now
fresh
people
plant
are
material,
fresh
which some
freezing.
people do that, yeah. So I think that's if you're after the other thing that makes me think about is the terpenoid profile. So, and I'm sure you know this, like the monoterpenes are the smallest, lightest, most volatile constituents, and those are the ones that are driven off by drying to a large degree, and they're driven off by decarboxylation. So, we talk about, the monoterpenes that are in cannabis, but we have to definitely keep it on the radar. Are we talking fresh? Are we talking dried? Are we talking decarboxylated? Because those are three very different situations. For instance, limonene. Are you familiar with limonene?
Oh, we sure are.
Yeah, yeah, great molecule. And it's very volatile, and it's that citrusy, wonderful lemon peel medicinal molecule. It has immunostimulant activity, antidepressant, antibacterial, anti-cancer, all that good stuff. But that's driven off, to some degree by drying. I mean, like, obviously you can still smell it in the dried, citrusy, dried plant material. But, the more drying there is, the less limonene you have, and the less myrcene you have, and the less of the alpha and beta pinene you have. And then if you're decarboxylating, then you're losing even more and more. And, so I think that's kind of a big factor because, like you say, we're learning now that these monoterpenes can be a huge part, of the medicinal activity of the plant.
Now, when you're saying you're driving them off, is it that you could recapture them theoretically, or is it that you're actually destroying them?
Well, I suppose you could recapture. I mean, by driving them off, I mean making them evaporate,
So
right?
okay, so they're not
So if they're,
destroyed; they're just gases.
yeah, they become gases basically. So like if you're doing, oh, one thing we used to do back in the day was we would take our percolated tincture and concentrate it to standardize the cannabinoid content. So, we would basically just put it in a little boiling flask, and then, the steam would go up, and just like essential oil distillation, we would capture it in a condenser, and then we would have the alcohol with all the terpenes that had been driven off, the lighter terpenes there. So, and then we used that alcohol again to do extractions with. So we were actually putting it back in, which was pretty interesting. But yeah, so you're not necessarily destroying it. I guess if you used enough heat, you could, but it's basically you're evaporating them off. You're steaming them away.
We've got a buddy who calls those the angel tears, because they're so volatile and they just are gone as
That's
soon
sweet.
as you smell them. Um,
Yeah.
but people are
Yeah.
getting increasingly good at capturing those. Oh, hold on, I'm messing with my
Excellent.
mic here. It's at a weird angle here. Is there any
Yeah.
traditional method for capturing those, or those are things that you just don't lose traditionally?
Yeah, well, when you do the percolation, right? You're not, if you, so we did percolation with dried because, that company was interested in decarboxylated material. So we percolated dried material, but you could do it with fresh material, and then they would, instead of going out into the atmosphere, they would pass into your ethanol basically, and then you just keep it covered, or, there's all kinds of fancy percolators out there now. We just use the old-fashioned ones. But yeah, I mean, they're very ethanol soluble, so you could definitely, by, somehow running the ethanol through the fresh plant material, you would definitely collect a lot of your monoterpenes and your sesquiterpenes as well.
And it's funny. There's a method that's known as like a quick wash, where you just kind of really, really quickly flash it with ethanol, and kind of the trick there though is to do it fast enough that you don't get any chlorophyll, of course. So you get that nice gray product at the end.
Yeah,
So
yeah, I hear you.
I know that's not necessarily the name of the game for you,
Right.
but any tips if that's what we're trying to do?
Yeah. Well, I'm sorry, I don't quite understand what you're asking me.
So I mean, if we're trying to do that sort of extraction where we are not pulling the chlorophyll, we're just trying to get sort of the exterior resin glands. Is there any way to
Right.
make that better or easier?
Oh, you know what? I've never tried to do that before. I mean, I don't see you would just, I don't know the laboratory techniques to do that, but chlorophyll is a big, heavy molecule, let's put it that way, and it's low polarity, and these are little tiny light molecules. So, something I would guess, let's see, if I was trying to do that, first I would extract with ethanol and get the full spectrum extract or the broad spectrum extract, and then I would probably distill it as if I were distilling it for an essential oil, because then you're going to get monoterpenes and sesquiterpenes, and I would distill and recondense and just use it's basically I would make an essential oil of the plant.
So how would you go about that process of distilling and recondensing?
Oh, it's super easy. You can just, people, it's just the way people make essential oils. It's steam distillation basically. And I'm sure there's all kinds of higher tech ways of doing that also, but you can, just get yourself a steam distillation kit. You get a hot plate, you get a boiling flask, you get a biomass flask, you hook them all up, you run steam up through your plant material, you run it through a cold water cooled condenser, and it drips out of a separator. It's super easy.
And now
So
is that only going
you're
to
basically
pull?
making essential oil of cannabis at that point. So that's when you're getting, the lighter terpenes without the carotenoids, without the, because sesquiterpenes are pretty much the smallest ones that are volatile. Like you might get an itty bitty bit of a diterpene in there, but probably not. So you're mostly going to get mono and sesquiterpenes by doing that.
And on that note, I do have to let you know I let you go over your 30-minute mark here, so I'm going
Oh,
to let you
yep.
take your break.
Okay, let's
And
take a short break.
yeah, let's do that. We're going to figure out our sound problems that we're having in studio here, and we'll talk to you in a minute.
Okay.
All right. All right, chat gang. Thanks for bearing with us. Hopefully you could hear the caller crystal clear. I know you can't hear us so hot right now. I got Vinny trying to fix it. I thought we had it, and then
What did you guys do?
and then no. One person mentioned they say it's way too bassy to them. Way too bassy for them. That's what they're all saying. And I'm gonna go back to my original mic because that sounded so much better.
Which one was that one?
That will be this one.
That's way better.
Yeah, back to my original mic. But now with this one, KTI, someone said I sounded like I was in a tin can. Tony Baloney said I was in a tin can. No one else said that. Anyway, it does sound like someone's blowing glass. I hear that too. There's a lot of background noise. But again, thankfully the caller audio is perfect. That's what matters way more than my audio. So, what do you guys think so far? And no one else is on the mic. That's why I can't make small talk. See, it's good when I have Adam. I guess I'll just do shout-outs. Big shout out to Way to Grow. Of course, 7 locations all over Colorado. They should be doing that sale. It started the 7th. Oh, I didn't say it last time. Let me pull it up now. That's the Got Bulb sale. $89.99 for the 600 watt. $129 for the 1000 watt. Those are both the blue spectrum metal halides. $69.99 for the HPS 600 watt, and of course the showstopper, $59.99 for the HPS 1000 watts. Stock up for the year at Way to Grow. You got 2 weeks to do it. You can get their locations at waytogrow.net, and then go to fine stores right there. And there's the store locator. Again, check them out at waytogrow.net. And of course, also big shout out to Incredibles Edibles. You can check them out at iloveincredibles.com. They're our favorite. I didn't get to check back with Mr. Miner and see if he did get to eat the Incredibles Edibles. But hopefully he got some. They're fantastic. Like we said, the concentrate's really phenomenal. So excited about the pen. If you can find, they got the Peach Dream back in stock for a limited time right now. It is peach season here in Colorado, so they have fresh freeze-dried peaches and cream, really delicious. You can find out more at I Love Incredibles, INCREDIBLES.com. And of course, big shout out to Build the Soil, our favorite place for anything to do with organics, really, one way or another. You can find out obviously more about them at buildthesoil.com. Jeremy coming last week and holding it down for organics, doing some wonderful things. Vinny's doing I don't know what with the sound right now. These are not wonderful things. None of this is organic. Vinny, just undo everything you did. Apparently, everyone says that it sounds worse since stuff started changing. So let's bring it back to undo everything you did.
Do it.
But we can hear Lisa's back on the line, so let's finish the shout outs here. And of course, big shout out to Growstone, our favorite source for aeration amendment. That's what they do. They do it really well. Is growstone.com. They're high performance. It's a high performance growing medium. It's 100% recycled glass. It's 100% American made. They're highly porous, chemical and toxin free. You can use it for hydroponics. You can use it for hydro. No one can hear it, dude. You can use it for anything. Vinny has hijacked the sound. He thinks he hit the sweet spot. Chat room, let us know if it's working for you. I don't know. I'm just going to believe him.
Right. Always fun with the tag.
Of course, and I can barely hear the caller now is the only thing, Vinny. So if you could bring her up in the mix. I can barely hear the caller. So if you could bring the caller up in my mix. And of course, big shout out to Veg and Bloom by Hydroponic Research. That's hydroponic-research.com. I didn't change anything. They are our favorite nutrient when you're growing on a large scale, especially indoors. Easily soluble, ready-made powder, easy to mix, very simple. Check them out, hydroponicresearch.com. And of course, seedsherenow.com. Seedsherenow.com, our favorite source for genetics. They got underground guys, they got bigger guys. They've got almost every line in the cannabis world. If you're looking for seed domestically, that's seedsherenow.com. And now back to our amazing caller, Lisa Ganora. How was your break?
All right. Hey, good. Yeah. What now?
What now, right? Well, so
What's next?
I feel like so far you've been a wealth of new stuff for us, so it's really cool. Well, we talked about you can do these partial extractions, right? Like you can pull off just some of the lighter stuff or just some of the heavier stuff. Now, what's the best way to recombine them once they're all sort of taken out of the plant?
Right. Well, and again, the best way depends on what you're aiming to do with it. So cannabis, like many plants, it has, a high percentage of resinous constituents, which are low polarity, which aren't necessarily interested in water and the water-soluble constituents. So, if you've got various fractions that you've taken out that aren't compatible polarity-wise, and you want to put them back together into something, you probably would have to do emulsification, and the traditional way that the pharmacist used to do emulsification was with plant gums and a lot of elbow grease and, a lot of mixing and stirring things together. And there's emulsification science is really complicated. It's really, really interesting stuff. One of the things I've been reading lately is an old pharmacist formulary, which is sort of the working handbook of the pharmacist back in the days when, you still hear this in the language when you go to the UK, they call the pharmacist the chemist, right? Because pharmacists used to be chemists, and they used to actually compound their medicines, and or even going further back, the pharmacists would have a bank of extraction cones going, and they would be making their syrups to deliver things in. They would be making all their herbal extracts, and then someone would come in with a prescription from the physician, and they would just pull it all together and mix it up and put it into different forms. So the historical literature from that world is super interesting about how they used to emulsify things. So, but I mean, there's all kinds of modern, food technology has, there's reams of information about how to emulsify potentially incompatible ingredients. So, it just depends on whether you want to go all natural or all organic and use just plant things, or if you're okay with a few low toxicity chemicals or whatever. But emulsification basically means, you're changing the characteristics of the different that was a bad sentence. Let's back up.
Sure.
It's you're harmonizing incompatibilities and solubility, right? So if you have a resin, say cannabinoids, which is only soluble in very high percentage ethanol or CO2 or an organic solvent, and you want to put it into a watery medium, like a lot of people actually make food products like this, like some of the sodas and drinks and whatnot, it has to be emulsified. So you have to put some kind of a phytochemical or a synthetic chemical in there to, get the water to accept the resinous molecules, so to speak. So that's what a lot of people are doing, just food technology style emulsification, I would imagine.
And now, one thing that I've always imagined is using that sort of logic for an extraction of the resinous stuff on the outside, right? Like, is there any way you can spray some sort of surfactant or something and then just wash it off with water? Because that would make it so much easier.
Yeah, I don't have a lot of knowledge about that. That sounds like something logical.
Does it
that you
sound
could-
possible?
It sounds possible. Yeah, I've never read anything about those sorts of techniques. I've never seen it done, but I don't there's nothing in my knowledge that would go like, oh, that wouldn't work, So that would be an interesting thing to work on.
So, speaking of
Yeah.
interesting things, kind of what I feel like when I started looking into other plants, because this was all amazing, right? Like, we all started learning about cannabis. In my case, I don't know, 14 years ago, really started getting educated about cannabis. And you start going on Google, and you go on Google Scholar, and you go like plus cannabis plus apoptosis, and oh my goodness, there's cannabis kills cancer, and like that is amazing, and it's still why we do the show, But now I've started typing in other plants plus apoptosis, and holy mackerel, our special girl's not quite as special as I thought.
Oh, she's very special. It's just that she's not the only one, And face it, it's people are really excited about cannabis a lot of times because it's an interesting, it's an interesting psychotropic experience. And a lot of people who get into it first do that for alteration of consciousness and creativity and relaxation and, social lubrication and all this stuff. But, and then the whole medicinal aspects have really been coming to the forefront lately. And people are like, wow, this really helps me with, an endless list of diseases and pain and discomfort and PTSD and all kinds of stuff. So I think, the plant was really quite famous to start with before we really started thinking about it so much in a medicinal way. And then, the other thing that's going on in our society is the plant is highly valued, right? So that, that's a big attractor too. There are weeds that you can walk outside your door and you can, step on a weed out there and just know nothing about it and think it's a weed, and that weed could literally save your life. Right? But they're not famous because they don't have interesting psychotropic activity and there's no economic value to them, right? So people just overlook that in our society, but that doesn't mean it's not there. It doesn't mean it's not real. That's what tickles me so much. I sit back and giggle at this whole scenario sometimes because I'm like, wow, this one plant, great plant, cannabis, amazing plant, getting all this attention, highly valued, people making fortunes, all kinds of legal craziness surrounding it. And here's this other weed in the yard that people just mow down and walk over and don't know a thing about, that's equally powerful but in a different way.
And I guess that's what I've been exploring recently and being very interested in.
Yeah.
And your point about the value is the piece that I guess I just take so for granted. It never really stood out to me, but I buy desert cistanche tincture that's like
supposedly really high end, and I pay
Right.
a lot for it, but it's way cheaper than cannabis tincture. And it definitely, we had
Right.
Adam take a whole lot of it one night when we did the show, and it was clearly effective.
Right, right, right. Yeah, there's all kinds of plants like that. It's just funny. It's just like what our society has been up to has put this plant up on her pedestal, for better and for worse. And we've been trained, by mainstream medicine to think the other plants are just, voodoo or old wives' tales or, weak and ineffective or dangerous or whatever. And that's just a cultural thing going on. That doesn't really have much to do with reality. Because there are a lot of powerful medicinal plants out there. They might not be as dramatic and as immediately obvious. And this applies to foods as well, right? We've done that whole same thing with foods. We eat a lot of, manufactured foods and processed foods and whatnot. But there are great medicinal powers in just your good old carrots and your beets. Like beets, for instance, what makes a beet that color? That like magenta, rich, kind of purpley red color that a beet is, that's actually a molecule you're seeing. They're called betalain alkaloids. And I met a researcher at the University of Texas down in Austin a few years ago, and their project was to take 200 of the most promising phytochemical antioxidants and see which one was the strongest. Right? And it turns out that that color that gives beets, the betalain alkaloids, were at that time of those 200 molecules the very strongest antioxidant with powerful anti-carcinogenic properties and powerful anti-inflammatory properties. And it's a beet, It's like, oh, I'll give you a dime for that.
So now, I'm always curious to know. You look at some websites and they say you have to get these exotic versions, or of course get organic or biodynamic versions. But like,
Right.
now I know there's certainly studies, the 20-year farm study we were talking about on last week's show, that proved that certainly there are higher concentrations of a lot of these desirable compounds in organic produce. But there's still a lot of it in like any beet, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Like, any beat is better than no beat at all. That sounds like that should be my slogan. I should put that on a bumper sticker. But yeah, any beat is better than no beat at all. Go with it. If it's not organic, wash the heck out of it. If you can afford organic, go for it. Grow your own, Go beet bombing around the neighborhood, throw beet seeds everywhere. But yeah, organic is great. It's great stuff, but you can, if your beet has that color, you're seeing the molecules. And if you're deciding between the bagel and the beet, you're going to get a lot more anti-inflammatory, antioxidant, and anti-cancer properties out of that beet than you are out of that bagel. So, yeah.
So I'm curious, like, we talk about when you say beet, I think about like one thing that's become popular here is like, or here in the organic growing scene is like using beet kvass, or like a fermentive beet in the growing. But that made me think, do you do any fermentations as part of extracting or any other part of what you do?
Oh, that's it. Well, how do you use the beet? What is that? What did you say?
So beet kvass, they like lacto ferment beet juice, I guess, or like the mash
Okay.
from beet
Oh,
juice.
You're
And
saying this word KVAAS, right?
yes, yep.
Yeah, okay. I gotcha.
And then they put that into, and they mix it in with the soil, or they use it. They will kind of make a spray of it, or just use it to control the
And
plant.
you spray that on your plants.
Sure.
And what properties does it have?
Well, people are looking to get the lactobacillus on their plant, and the basic thought is that it's going to give, like it would in your stomach, some protection against pathogens. It seems
Right,
to work.
right.
And
Right,
the
that's
other
really
side thing is it seems to increase like aromatic compounds in general. That's my rough unscientific, because I know
kidding.
aromatic compounds is a specific scientific thing, but smells better, higher terpene content. It tastes more bitter when you bite it.
That's really interesting. Yeah, because this is a hot topic in human physiology is the microbiome now, which the microbiome is like all of the microorganisms that live inside us and on us, including the the lactobacilli that you get with fermentations, with like sauerkraut and the beets and all that stuff.
Yeah.
So I don't know if have you been following this at all? Have you seen what's going on with that?
I actually just read it. I mean, that's kind of like where I learned cannabis growing was a bunch of really hardcore micro nerds, so cooking teas and things like that. But in terms of the human microbiome, like I just saw an article the other day about And I know they recently, I want to say within the past 5 years, discovered sort of an off Amazon tribe that had no Western contact. But I just
Right.
read something that said they had like 30 times or 60 times more
Right,
biodiversity
right.
than we have in all humans outside there. That's nuts to me.
Yeah, I saw that go by too. So we're discovering all kinds of crazy things about the microbiome and what it does for us. Like a lot of and the same thing is, it's interesting to hear what you're doing with that beet stuff, because what that makes me think of is, this is sort of something, this is a kind of layer, this is a kind of interconnecting web for all of the different organisms and life on Earth, is this microbiome, right? Because think about it, like inside of us, they used to say, and this wasn't even that long ago, right? They used to say, oh, there's probably maybe 2,000 different species in your GI system. Now they're up to about what, 20,000? It's being rapidly discovered that we have these complex ecosystems of microorganisms inside us, not only inside us, but all over us, everywhere, on
And
our
they like
skin.
control us to some
Blah.
degree too. They control our
That's
emotions
the interesting part,
increasingly.
isn't it? Well, control might not be the word that I would use there, but influence would definitely
Sure.
be a word that I would
Well,
use.
and that's
And
something we think about with cannabis too. And this is where I
right.
think in medicinal plants, like we, especially cannabis, which has been so cultivated and so valued disproportionately in so many cultures for so long,
Uh-huh.
there's this weird relationship that builds between the, and
One thing that we sort of anecdotally note is like, it doesn't matter who the grower is, and it doesn't matter, like, that grower can move anywhere and they can grow the same cultivars, the same strains, as another grower, and they can move anywhere, but no matter what, they have their signature taste, even if they change
Hmm.
how they're growing, and it's something about the
Interesting.
way they are with the plant. And I mean, it could be really basic, as like, oh, well, they just tend to be heavy waterers, that's their thing, and
Mm-hmm.
they always do.
Right,
Or
right, right.
it could be that,
Maybe it's a microbiome effect.
sure, and
Because yeah, that's the point I was moving towards there, is that we share the microbiome, right? And they've done scientific studies on this, that we share it with the people that we live with. The baby originally gets it from their mother, from contact with their mother, on the way out into the world. That's how a baby gets inoculated for the most part. And then everybody else who touches the baby and holds the baby starts establishing that person's microbiome from youth. And then there's all these influences that change it. Also, the animals you're with. So, like, you live with cats, you live with dogs, you live on a farm, you have horses, whatever. You're going to be sharing microbiome with those animals. And of course, with all the plants that are in your environment as well. So, that's an interesting realm of speculation there. If a person has an intimate relationship with, plants that they're growing, they spend a lot of time with them, are they going to be sharing, their microbiome to some extent? And since bacteria get around really well, I would expect that happens. Whether or not that contributes to that signature aroma, there's a very, very interesting question. That would be hard to study.
so that the only thing I can contribute to that study is that when we did have Elaine Ingham, she pointed to some research that there is some evidence that different forms of microlife will stimulate or increase, affect, let's say, the specific concentrations of
Okay.
constituents. So I'll go for
Okay,
it.
and so here's another thing in that line of thought, that is the soil microbiome is really, really important. So you have your symbiotic or your commensal mycorrhiza, which are all these beneficial fungal constituents of the soil that occur with a plant in nature. And like any wild plant, say wild ginseng or something like that, will have a sphere of its own particular soil organisms, bacterial, algal, fungal, probably even viral, that are associated with the roots of that plant. And that's something that's being discovered continually about how strong that influence is. But I do remember seeing some stuff go by recently that some of the phytochemicals that we used to think the plants were making in their roots are actually products of other organisms in that soil microbiome.
And when
Which
you talk to people who are really into mycorrhiza, the way they explain it as sort of this, like this third, it's not the plant, it's not the fungus, it's this third life form, and it actually connects and forces resource sharing among the plants. It's this weird, like,
right.
network.
Yeah, it's it's just another example of the complex systems of nature because when we think about things, we want to name them. This is like the human way of operating. We want to name something, that way we can talk about it, right? We want to quantify it, that way we can measure and start getting a handle on what's going on, and we want to simplify it because you understand things one piece at a time. That's the value of reductionism. But you have to continually keep stepping back and looking at the big picture and being like, you know what? It's the system. It's the extremely complex biological system at work here. So if you take a kind of systems approach to it, it's not just the human, it's not just the cannabis, it's not just the lactobacillus, it's not just the mycorrhiza, it's, and the pollinators and the predators and all of it. It's, that whole system is influencing what the chemistry is doing. The chemistry is adaptive and the chemistry is reactive to the whole system, right? And light, air, carbon dioxide, et cetera, is part of that system. So, I think it really helps us understand, or maybe like come up with beneficial ways to engage that complexity when we keep stepping back from our reductionist viewpoint, if that makes any
No,
sense.
I think that's a brilliant answer. I think that's exactly
Yeah.
what I was hoping for. So when we talk about sort of, this is the first thing that came up when I sort of told the guys about your background was that you probably know ways to get high that we don't know. So,
Oh, there's an endless number of ways. Yeah.
so well, first that kind of led me to a side thought is like, how unique is it to smoke an herb to derive medicinal effects from it
Yeah,
in the grand
probably
scheme of
not. If you
all?
look at cultures all over the world, everybody smokes something, don't they? I mean, tobacco in the degraded state that we have, it used to be a sacred herb to many of the Native American tribes. That was a revered sacred herb and referred to as grandfather and used to connect with the spirits and with the spirit world. And everybody, I think you look at, there's all kinds of different smoking mixes that were called kinnick, which, would involve local blends, and some of them would have uva ursi in them, and some would have mullein and different things like that. In Europe, there's definitely a tradition of smoking all different sorts of things for different purposes. It's one way to apply medicinal smoke as well to the lungs is just to burn plant material.
That
And
was always my argument as an asthmatic.
yeah,
Like, it wasn't until I really started smoking a lot of good herb that my asthma cleared up. And
well,
I was like, oh, there's people would say, well, can't you eat it? And I would say it doesn't do the same thing. And I thought
right.
I wasn't sure I was telling the truth, but
Mhm.
thanks for the backup.
Yeah, well, your personal experience is very valid because, as you know, with cannabis, different people react very differently, even to, the same strain to the same plant. So there's a lot. It's not just the plant, it's the relationship between the plant and the person, right? And which can change over time, et cetera. A lot of factors in there. But yeah, people have done that everywhere. Like, you see, anytime you look into an indigenous culture all over the world, they have something that they like to smoke. So, and it does make sense in a certain way. Like you can breathe. Oh, sorry about that. Are you hearing that sound?
No, I don't hear
Okay,
anything.
I can ignore it then. Somebody's, this is my Google Voice number, so it's somebody's calling in from the other. Anyway, just ignore that. Okay, so what I was getting at is there are smokes that irritate and there are smokes that soothe more than they irritate, right? And so, different plants have different characteristics, but when you're breathing in a smoke, you're actually applying, any medicinal power that might have directly to your pulmonary tissue, to your lung tissue. So, if you're happening to be breathing something that's strongly anti-inflammatory, then it would make sense that would help, with your situation. But the interesting thing is, with vaporizing, now there's vaporizing versus smoking, which I find to be fascinating
I would
because
love your take on this because I have a very
yeah,
specific take.
yeah. So, vaporizing, like the first thing that you're taking off of there is the volatiles. I haven't actually done this, but I wonder what it would be like to vaporize fresh plant material. I haven't actually
I
done
don't know
that.
anyone who has. I'm trying to
I
get
know,
my hands on
just
this thing called a
go do
sublimator.
that.
That's
Let me know what happened.
I should try that at my house later.
Um,
so yeah, I've seen people try it. on like hot surfaces. I've never seen it like really executed with a
Uh-huh.
proper device. Um,
Yeah. So, I mean, what you're doing, is like you're liberating, so to speak, the lightest, most volatile constituents, the monoterpenes and the sesquiterpenes first, and then, as the process goes on. Um, but I find that, it's a very different experience to vaporize than it is to burn. And I actually prefer the vaporizing because I feel like I'm getting terpenes, and more of them without possibly degrading them by actual fire, right? So for me, that seems like you might be favoring some of those medicinal terpenes by doing the vaporization process. But the idea of actually doing it with raw plant material, my hypothesis would be that you would get even a higher concentration of beneficial terpenes that way.
So like live resin.
well, yeah, in live resin. So this is to go back to just pulling the gold. So the sort of the really fancy, very trend. The trend for the last little bit here has been live resin or live extraction, where you would take a plant and fresh freeze it, ideally cryogenic freeze it, and
Uh-huh.
then extract it with your solvent under those conditions. Keep the
Uh-huh.
solvent super cold. Keep the
Right, right,
extractant calm.
right.
So you're not pulling any waxes. You're really just pulling cannabinoids and terpenes.
Uh-huh.
But they're
Okay.
really in a very, if they've never thawed, they've never had a chance to degrade or
Right,
evaporate,
right.
as it were.
That's interesting.
And the nose knows. You definitely can tell that there is a much higher terpene content. You see up to 8%, 12% in
Yeah,
some crazy
okay.
cases.
That's really cool. Yeah, I haven't seen that, but that's a very logical approach for, if you're focusing on the medicinal properties of those terpenes, that sounds great.
And it's interesting, kind of like what you were pointing to before. The interesting thing about it being such a high value crop and all the extracts being even higher value is like it really drives people to try crazy new things
Right?
to make it better because it's worth even more if you do that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah. What a funny world we live in, isn't it? And it's just a weed.
So
It's so much a weed that we call it weed.
yeah,
That
versus
just
anything
cracks me
else.
up. I know, we're always making a joke. We're like, cannabis is the gateway weed. You start getting interested in that weed, then you're going to get interested in other weeds, and pretty soon you're going to be an
Yeah.
herbalist.
Yeah.
No, that's
That was
certainly
my gateway.
that's where a lot of
Yeah.
us
Or it's really funny to see, a lot of people. I mean, I'm a kid from New Jersey. I don't know, and like there are no, despite the name, the Garden State. Like I didn't grow up around a lot of plants, and
Oh, yeah,
to
back
suddenly be developing an interest is really cool.
Yeah, it really, like, once you get that, you're like, this is an amazing plant, and you open that door and you're like, oh my gosh, there's 1,000 more of them right
Yeah.
here. It kind of brings you back into the Garden of Eden there, and you start discovering all this cool stuff. Which is, what I'm really interested in is formulating synergistically with, because cannabis has all these great properties. And I know several people who are, making salves and oils and, different topical applications where they're formulating things like arnica and St. John's wort and these other herbs that have, beneficial properties for, muscle soreness, aches and pains, different things like that. And they're making some really, really nice mixtures. And, you know, if you think of Chinese medicine, for instance, that's all about formulas. So not only do you have a single plant with all its phytochemicals and properties and potentialities, but now you're putting two together, you're putting three, four, five, six, seven plants together in a formula. And, a lot of the traditional medicinal powers of these formulas are well understood in Chinese medicine. And it's kind of, it's another level of the synergy thing. So, I think herbalists in Colorado who, have the ability to do formulation with different herbs along with the cannabis are really coming up with some beautiful medicinal products now.
And are there any real traditional sort of cannabis formulations that people can kind of derive inspiration from, or are there sort of known synergies that work really well?
Yeah, I don't have a lot of firsthand knowledge on this, but I know some folks who do traditional Southwestern Hispanic herbalism, and they're like, "Oh yeah, Grant, then somebody's growing some cannabis down that way, and they take the fan leaves and the trim sometimes, and just do a oil infusion or just a olive oil extraction or whatever herbalist style, And that's, just what grandma's always done, and she learned it from her grandma. And what they like to put it together with is a desert herb called chaparral or creosote bush, Laurea tridentata. No, not tridentata. Maybe I forget right now. Laurea. And I've heard that that's a very popular traditional salve just to rub on your aches and your arthritis and your achy back and all that kind of thing, is that the chaparral with the cannabis leaves
Hmm.
together. Yeah.
That's cool.
So,
Are there a lot? I mean, I feel like the plant's been, as we see evidence of it, like almost everywhere back to the dawn of human history. There have to be all sorts of these recipes out there.
oh yeah, of course, I mean, golly, they were using this plant. What's the earliest recorded use? Like 3,000 years ago in Chinese
Yeah,
medicine. I'm
longer.
sure they were formulating with it.
And Ayurvedic medicine seem to have used it for everything, and now like you don't really
Right.
see any formulations with it.
Yeah, I'll bet you a person could do a PhD project on that. Wouldn't that be fun?
Maybe I'll go back to school. Maybe I'll quit my job and go back to school.
Take a sabbatical and just spend a year like finding old formulas. I'll bet you if you made some friends with some village herbalists in some rural areas in different parts of the world, you could probably get in touch with people who are making some really interesting old school medicinal formulas with that plant. That would not surprise me at all.
One question that I have is I'm kind of getting interested in other medicinal herbs is this whole thing we have with strains. And like there can be really, really broad differences. Like the variety that you can find in
Right.
the bouquet off of cannabis is really crazy. Like there's rotten meat and there's like candy, and it's
Right.
the same plant.
Yeah.
First of all, do you see that variety in other herbs, or is that somewhat unique?
Yeah, well, we've been breeding. You have to remember that. There's been intensive breeding with cannabis, and that's what's really bringing that out and making that feature. And that hasn't been done with other herbs. To some extent, you see that in herbs that are used in aromatherapy. For instance, the herb thyme. What they have, they don't call it strains in aromatherapy. When they have plants of different characteristics, they call it chemotypes.
Mm.
So and the abbreviation for that is CT. So if you're looking, through a more technical aromatherapy essential oils book, you'll see something like rosemary, CT terpenine or pinene or linalool or whatever. And what that means is that, strain of the rosemary or that chemotype of the rosemary has a particular, profile of constituents, its essential oil that features that certain one. So if you say rosemary chemotype or thyme, you see this in thyme as well. Thyme chemotype linalool, that would be like a very sort of mild, gentle, tasty sort of thyme that you might favor in your culinary applications. Where if you have thyme chemotype thymol, that would be a really like kind of strong, almost burning medicine-y, throat antiseptic sort of thyme that you would make a throat spray out of or something like that. So to some extent in aromatherapy chemistry, they do, they have developed these different chemotypes, but I just don't think the breeding just hasn't been anywhere near as intensive as it has been with cannabis because of economic factors and creativity. So,
That's actually my most interesting takeaway of the show. Like, there's that no one's ever done it. Like, I thought everyone had tried, and there was just no reason to, but no one's ever done it. Well, that's a really good reason to start doing it.
yeah, I mean, if you think about classical plant breeding, people have done things like, gosh, what if, think about some food that comes in a bunch of different varieties, like think about carrots,
Oh,
like
our favorite
you know,
example is cotton candy grapes.
cotton candy grapes, yeah, grapes. It's like, even just with classical plant genetics, if you take one thing and you breed it enough over enough years, you're going to come up with a whole bunch of different variety and, not only terpenes, but colors, other molecules. So I guess it's just, it's kind of a feature of the amount of attention that's been given to this plant over many generations that have given us that variety in the terpenoid content with the different strains.
So one thing that's interesting to me is that, like, when we talk about the things, terpenes, terpenoids, they're often named after other things, right? There's pinene, there's not cannabinine, at least as far as I know. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
But then there are the cannabinoids, which is like that's what's unique to this plant.
Yeah,
And
that's interesting.
there's some other plants that produce some stuff in that class, but I guess what the first thing that like, oh wow, put things in perspective to me, I was reading about ginseng and like the ginseng, the ginseng only saponins, where it's like, hey, well, it has its own thing that it makes only, and then gynostemma has a ton of its own things that are like the ginseng ones that it
Right.
makes only, and
Right, or turmeric with its curcuminoids is another good example.
there's so much, there's so many of these special potentials out there in plants, and one thing that I keep coming back to is like, there's a lot of like really motivated, really smart young people who are pretty darn good at extracting plants out there in the world thanks to cannabis. And there's a whole world of medicine that's ready to get that sort of technique put into it, and maybe like cannabis is this weird talking point in this conversation, because if you got to
Right.
talk about it being legal, then Sanjay Gupta has to answer whether it works, and if he has to answer whether it works, he has to explain how it works. And now we're talking about all this stuff that like your doctor doesn't talk about. And
Right.
once you've started that conversation, how hard is it to say, like, you gave the example of thyme, which was one of those plants that I happen to find, like, oh, that thymol can shrink tumors too. Like, there's all these plants that we could be harvesting and using in sort of this increasingly sophisticated way, like cannabis.
Yeah, the cat's out of the bag at this point, isn't it? So, I love what's happening. It's like we live in interesting times, to quote an old saying, because, there's a
Wasn't that
lot
an
of
old
terrible
curse, though?
stuff. What's that?
Isn't that an old curse, though? May you live in interesting times, isn't that the idea?
Well, that's one interpretation, but we do live in interesting times. There's a lot of bad things happening in the world, no doubt today. We've got some major challenges, but at the same time that this is going on, there's this there's this, like, dare I call it, this liberation of consciousness that people are having. It's like every day in all different kinds of fields, in all different kinds of worlds of experience, I see people going, oh, but if I can do this, I can also do all these things. If cannabis is a great medicinal plant, what about calendula? What about, turmeric? What about St. John's wort? And then they try them and they're like, oh, natural medicine. That's not so weird after all. What about growing my own food? It's like there's this sort of reawakening to, our place in nature, because frankly, we're standing on the edge of a cliff. We could either, ruin everything and die, right? Or we can step back and be like, okay, we need to re-engage and find ourselves as part of this natural world, and find, how we're connected. Like, this world provides us medicine. We tend these plants that provide us medicine.
We open that two-way
just
street back up.
Yeah, exactly. We've been pretending like we're living on, some spaceship or something, and we can just throw the trash out the window and it'll be gone, and that's not the way it works. And like, what's encouraging to me, even given the dire situation that we're in with the global warming and the fracking and the pollution and all that, is young people are getting it. The generations, like, I'm over 50 now, and I grew up with a lot of denial and blindness, culturally speaking. But I think the young people are just really getting it in so many different kind of ways right now. And, when you look back at our cultural relationship with cannabis over the years and how that's blossoming forth now in the way that it is, I just, really, like, it's kind of a joke, but it isn't, that this is a gateway herb that leads us to the other herbs and to the reconnection with nature. And, that's what we need to survive and thrive in the future.
No, I definitely agree with you there. It's cool to hear it from your side of the fence in this conversation. Like, that's really cool. Well, you said 4. We said it was going to go to 4:30. It's just about 4:20.
Well, there we go. 420.
Yeah, there you go. So, wow, I really want to thank you for being on the show, Lisa. I know
It
that
was
we're
really
going to
fun.
have a million more questions. Can we call on you again to join us in the
Sure,
future?
why not?
Awesome.
Yeah.
That's great. That's what we like to hear. Well, that's great, Lisa. We're going to let you get on to your Friday and your weekend and everything coming
All
forward.
right.
Thank
you
for
so much.
Thank
It was
you.
great.
Thanks, Lisa.
right on, and hopefully you'll see a bunch of these guys ordering books. We told them to mention us if they do, and they're pretty
Excellent.
loyal about that.
But hey, let me throw a plug in.
Do
Actually,
it. Yeah.
October the 17th through the 21st, just about a month from now, I'm doing a phytochemistry intensive week. So if you go to our website, clinicalherbalism.com, and go to the workshops page, it'll tell you all about it. So we're going to do a whole week. We're going to talk about herbal constituents, solubility and extraction, synergy, and we're going to do hands-on practices and have beautiful pictures and, what's in the herbs, what it does, constituents of different famous medicinal plants.
Oh, and it's
Um,
right here in Boulder.
so
I'm looking at it
right
right now.
here in
Oh, that's
Boulder.
cool.
Yeah. So if you're really interested in, and you don't have to have a chemistry background or you don't have to be an herbalist to understand it. It helps if you know a little bit about it, but it's open to anybody. So that's coming up, yeah, in October. And so maybe some of the listeners would be interested in that. Just go to that website, and I think there's an online registration page as well. And yeah, if you need more information, you can always give me a call.
Right on. Well, hopefully you see a lot of bushy beards in that audience that we sent you.
Bushy beards.
Right on, Lisa. Thank you so much, and we'll talk soon, hopefully.
Okay. Have a great
Thanks.
weekend.
You too. Bye-bye.
Okay, bye.
Well, that was a cool show.
So cool.
That was a really cool show. We made a cool new friend today.
I'm glad that I was here to listen.
Yeah. You heard it first.
It
You
was,
literally heard it like 10 seconds before everyone else because of the broadcast delay.
Haha.
Yeah, that was a learning episode.
It was a lot of seeing the same stuff, different.
Well, for me, it's
You
new
know?
stuff.
Like there was a lot of stuff that we talk about, but it was just talking about it a different way.
Absolutely.
Oh, I can't wait to hear what Adam has to say about it.
Perspectives are so valuable, aren't they?
And yeah, cool. She made the 420 joke, which is exactly what I was hoping would go down. Did we finish doing shout-outs?
Well, I don't remember. But do another round?
You know what? We're gonna throw in another round because it looks like I stopped at Incredibles. I feel like I did them all. Though. I think I did them all. We'll do another round just for fun, and of course, then we'll do personal shout-outs, and then we'll clear out by 4:30 because what the hell, traffic. Big shout out, of course, to Way to Grow. They got the bulb sale going on. Go stock up. They got it going for the next 2 weeks or so till 21st of September at all 7 locations. You can get your list at waytogrow.net, and it's really if you're gonna keep a closet full of bulbs, as is wise to do, you should probably go now.
They look bright, but they need to be replaced.
The bulbs you have are definitely not as bright as
They
you
look
think
bright,
are.
but they definitely need replaced.
That's true fact. Big shout out, of course, to Incredibles Edibles. They got that peach bar going right now. You can find out more about it at iloveincredibles.com. But Peach Dream Bar with fresh peaches. I think they're Palisade peaches, if I had to guess, because that's what all the roadside stands for peaches in Colorado say.
Safe bet.
And they freeze dry them, I guess, right there. I don't know, but they're bomb. And
They're
you can get
definitely
'em
flame.
At most dispensaries, you can find out which ones are carrying them right on the website. Of course, big shout out to Dark Horse Genetics, Dark Horse Concentrates, the whole crew down there. Seeds are on sale throughout the state. We kind of slowed down a little. We're waiting for our licensing to shift because we have to distribute them out of Pueblo, which is a pain. We're waiting for them to come to Denver, and then we can distribute them out of Denver, and then it'll be way more places. But right now, you can go pick them up at Harvest House in Netherland. We had some up in Fort Collins at Natural Alternatives. There's some at the far reaches of the state. I think they were for their own garden, though, out there on the western slope and down near New Mexico. So, but Dark Horse Genetics starting to pop up more and more. And, of course, Dark Horse Concentrates pushing out stuff on the regular. A big shout out to Build a Soil. Jeremy holding it down last week, teaching us plenty of reasons why, if you're going to get started, you should probably get started growing soil, not hydro. And it's common sense, but some people overthink it. But go back, listen to last week's episode, and you will certainly know why. Or just check out buildasoil.com to find out how easy it is. Big shout out to Growstone. Find out more at growstone.com. They make our favorite aeration amendment, whether you're mixing it with cocoa, whether you're mixing it with soil, whether you're just using it straight up. You can use Growstones, and no matter how you grow, and they're great for pretty much every method. A lot of you guys are using them out there and giving us great feedback, so we feel confident repping them.
And Paula on the end of October.
Paula is coming, what is that, October 28th?
October 28th.
Yes, sir. Big shout out to Veg and Bloom, which is at hydroponic-research.com. Our favorite source of really large-scale, consistent nutrient salt. They have a great lineup. They do things consistently, like I said, efficiently, effectively. It's great herb. If you're going small scale, if you're going outdoor, I'm going to make you go organic. But if you're going big scale indoor, the only way to go, Veg and Bloom. And of course, seedsherenow.com, 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 seedsinalaska.com with Adam is where Seeds is. So I wish we could have one of them here, but we don't have either of them. We could have both of them. They could call in. Adam's listening, actually, because he's messaging me, but he's not calling in. And he definitely knows the number. But big shout out to seedsherenow.com. Let's see what sale he's got going on now. Mr. Bean. James Bean, that is. That's seedsherenow.com. Store. He's got a store locator.
Oh, there you go. The 50% off Crockett TH Seeds.
50% off Crockett TH Seeds.
Snow High Imperial.
15% Snow High Imperial.
And then you got some of the auctions.
He has live auctions now, and there's a store locator, which is new.
So he had some forgotten packs.
Hold
he
on,
had some
I'm going
packs
to
from back in the day, or something that he
He's got
dug up
exotic
somewhere.
genetics, recovered genetics, the bullfighter, the chocolate covered strawberries, and the cookies and cream F1, the Kimbo Kush F1, the Optimus Prime, the Snow Monster, and the Hulk, all from exotic. They're on auction right now. Some of them are starting to get up there. That chocolate covered strawberry is starting to get pricey. So if you're trying to make the big play, now's the time. Also, don't they got it's awesome. They got a store locator right there in Eugene, Oregon, Salem, Oregon, Portland, Oregon. They're, I guess, distributing the whole lineup. That's cool. We'll get James on to talk about that. More in Portland, Oregon, Harbor, Oregon, Charleston, Oregon. Find out more. Seedsherenow.com has all the info that you're looking for. Hop on. And with that, we're going to wrap up. Who's got shouts?
Shout goes out to the mountains.
To the mountains.
I'm pretty stoked. I'm pretty stoked.
We're going to lose KT out of the mountains, but he claims that the snow's not going to stop.
No, we're not going to lose me. I'm going to be around, but I'm really excited. So
that's good.
I'm pretty stoked.
I'm pretty stoked, bro. Awesome. Generally, do you have shout-outs?
Shout out to my people.
All of them.
My people know if they're my people. So.
What up?
Shout out to Adam out there in the Alaskan wilds. I hope everything's safe. I hope you didn't get eaten by a bear, since he told me that my mic sounds crappy. Hopefully you're alright, buddy. Shout out to all the sponsors. Shout out to my remarkable wife, Reese. Little kiddo Farron, who killed it at her first week of school yesterday and today.
That's a big step. That's
She's
a big
at an
whoop.
outdoor school. See, Adam put Nick in a yoga school. Very good. Very good. Our little girl's at a farming school. So she's like watering plants. She's carrying buckets.
That's awesome.
She's doing everything that should be second nature to her. So she's going to pay for her own college education, obviously.
Build a soil school.
Yeah, exactly.
It's awesome.
Yup. And, yeah, big shout out to you guys for tuning in. We'll be back, of course, I won't be here next week. Adam's going to be here with two. They're talking CBD and epilepsy specifically. Week after 2, we have... I'm racking my brain. It's slipping my memory. I promise you we have a show lined up. We're going to get the Elite Cannabis guys coming soon. Who else did we say we're getting? Obviously, we got Paul Acosta coming soon in October. So we got a big lineup coming together.
Yeah, there's a lot of people, Jeff.
Anyway, the guy who does the podcast just messaged me. He got caught up over the holiday weekend, but he's getting back to it. There should be another big dump coming soon. I know we got a lot of listens when we released a bunch of those old podcasts, but many of them are uploaded. Actually, they're just set as private, so he just has to run the program that resets them as names them and resets them as not private, which he'll be doing. And we'll get another huge dump coming soon. We will be up to date on the podcast. So for those of you listening to this on podcasts, welcome back. Those of you who don't listen to the podcast, that's where you can find the full archive. You guys are always asking where you can find other episodes. Of course, you can go to livestream.com/Adam Dunn Show, or you can just go to subscribe on podcasts and browse through the whole catalog. Anyway, while you guys figure that out, I'm going to go try to beat the traffic. And Adam will be here with you next week without me, and then we will be reunited the following week for what was definitely a big show, but I can't remember what it is right now.
Big stuff coming.
Stay tuned to find out more. We'll catch you guys later.